Good afternoon. It's such a privilege to be with you. I want to thank you for the great honor of addressing your Triennial gathering. And I want you to know that I come from a long line of gifted and committed Episcopal Church women, and I feel right at home. Perhaps like many of you, I am the happy beneficiary of having a grandmother, a mother, and my mother's twin sister who were instrumental in passing on the tenets of the faith to me. They were committed church women, fearsome, you know the kind, the ones who were the head of the altar guild that you didn't mess with, the ones that helped run rummage sales when we did those things, potlucks, and the ones that were always there when the clergy were having a bad time or needed encouragement or needed a corrective word, which was also the case. And it seems to me that your theme for your triennial is so incredibly appropriate. Stir up the spirit, celebremos, taken from 2 Timothy. And you'll recall that Timothy received his mentoring and spiritual grounding from his grandmother and mother. As Paul writes, I'm reminded of your sincere faith, a faith that lived first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and now I am sure lives in you. The passage that your theme comes from says, I remind you to stir up the gift of God, which is in you through the laying on of hands. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. When I was invited to address your group, I had enough sense to ask some of the ECW women from the Washington area where I come from, what would you want to hear? I mean, what should I say to your group? And as always, they gave me good advice. They said, we want to hear a bit of your story. We want you to be mindful of ours and hopefully to inspire us, to discern with us and speak to what the stirring of the Spirit might mean in this time and in this place. And so I'll start with just sharing a little bit of my own story. Perhaps like many of you, I grew up in the church. I was blessed to have parents and grandparents for whom Sundays were a really important part of the week, a seminal part. I grew up in a little teeny mission congregation in South Texas, which meant that I had every unpaid job that you could have in the church. Even when I was young, despite the fact that in many other churches, girls weren't allowed to do some things. There were so few of us that no one bothered to care about gender. I was an acolyte, I sang in the choir. I was even the church organist in high school, not because I was good, but because I was free. And I remained involved in the church after college and was extremely involved in the church when I moved to Washington and found my home at St. John's Lafayette Square, where, like many of you, I served and chaired outreach and was on the vestry and was a warden and chaired the search committee for the rector and was humming along doing all those things in life and started my own business and did some other things along the way. But then something quite unexpected happened about 13 years ago. I found out I had breast cancer, and obviously it was caught early. I'm still here, and that is a blessing. But for those of you who have gone through something like that or have a dear friend or relative who has, I think you know that you can't take that journey, I think, without being a little more intentional about your prayer life and deeply and profoundly asking God how God would have you live your life. With that, however long that is on this earth, what is your purpose for my life? How can I best serve you? And it was in the course of that quite unexpectedly, I began to sense that God was calling me in a different direction. It wasn't that I hadn't been involved in the church. It wasn't that matters of faith weren't important to me. But things I could tell were beginning to change. And when I really prayed to God to show me and went on a silent Lenten retreat, I sensed God saying to me, I have more for you to do. And being a little bit irreverent, I, in response to God, said, well, that's really wonderful to know. Could you be a little more specific? More to do is kind of a broad category. And I distinctly felt the call to ordain ministry. It was not something that I had contemplated from the time I was a little girl. It came quite unexpectedly and seemingly suddenly to me. So 8 years ago, I became ordained. 5 years ago, I was called to the National Cathedral to be its vicar. And my position at the time was to help grow and deepen the resident cathedral congregation. What you may know about the cathedral is it's been around for over 100 years. What you may not know, it was only 8 years ago that a resident congregation was formalized. And so it's still very embryonic. But in the 4 years that I was its vicar, it grew by over 500 members. And so you have to ask, what is God doing? And how can we best not screw that up? That was part of my job. And I noticed so many things about how God was moving in our midst, and I'll say a little bit more about that later. But what I wanted you to know in hearing my personal story is that I believe to the core of my being that when we ask God to show us where God would have us go, God will respond. It's a question of whether we will be courageous enough and trusting enough to follow. Because you'll remember that God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. And as we explore the stirring of the Spirit this afternoon, I'm mindful of the powerful way in which the Spirit has guided you from your very beginnings. Since your founding in the 1870s, you've touched countless lives and raised millions of dollars in supporting the upbuilding of the church and God's people. And today, of course, the ECW is international in its scope and reach, and you have much to celebrate in your many and myriad accomplishments. Celebremos, and thank you on behalf of a very grateful group of God's people who have been the beneficiaries of your hard work and efforts. And what I'd like to do in our time together this afternoon is to explore the prophetic voice of God. Where is God calling us today? What is our vision and vocational calling in this time, and where is the Spirit stirring? In his landmark book, The Prophetic Imagination, Walter Brueggemann looked to relate the lessons of the Bible's prophets to the time of his writings, which was in the late 1970s. Brueggemann noticed that liberals and conservatives were both monolingual. Liberals almost exclusively critiqued what was. Meanwhile, he argues, conservatives became more effective because they energized a base towards a vision of the future. Brueggemann reminds us that we're not energized by what we already have, but by what is promised and not yet given, the kingdom of God. The role of a prophet is then both to critique and to energize. Prophets must be multilingual and speak in both critique and hope. And as we look at church trends in our time, one could argue that the statistics don't look very hopeful. In fact, one could say that the prophetic voice in reflecting on what we have in our time is cause for grief, or certainly lament. Only you and God can direct where the Spirit is leading you to respond at this time. There's so many needs and opportunities to make a difference in our world today, whether it's issues of racial reconciliation and justice issues, the micro-enterprise grants that you are making possible to women around the world. As I said earlier, I believe to the core of my being that if you ask God to guide and empower you, I'm confident that God will. And what I plan to share this afternoon is just one possibility for your prayerful consideration. And I do so believing that ECW is already well equipped to respond. And that possibility is for you to intentionally mentor young adults and to redouble your efforts if you already are doing that. Church trends in this country show a rapidly changing landscape. You all know the statistics, and the trends are going in the wrong direction. The age distribution within the Episcopal Church is older than the general population, with baby boomers rapidly moving into the ranks of the elderly and a decrease in numbers of young adults, youth, and children. Our churches are becoming disproportionately older and grayer. Listen to what Rachel Held Evans, a millennial, says in her recently published book, Searching for Sunday, Loving, Leaving, and Finding the Church. And I quote, "In the U.S., 59% of young people ages 18 to 29 with a Christian background have dropped out of the church. Among those of us who came of age around the year 2000, this is Rachel Held Evans, not me, a solid quarter claim no religious affiliation at all, making us significantly more disconnected from faith than members of Generation X were at a comparable point in their lives, and twice as disconnected as baby boomers were as young adults. It's estimated that 8 million young adults will leave the church before their 30th birthday." She writes, as a millennial, "We're tired of the culture wars, tired of Christianity getting entangled with party politics and power. Millennials want to be known for what we're for, not just for what we're against. We don't want to choose between science and religion or between our intellectual integrity and our faith. Instead, we long for our churches to be safe places to doubt, to ask questions, and to tell the truth even when it's uncomfortable. We want to talk about the tough stuff, biblical interpretation, religious pluralism, sexuality, racial reconciliation, and social justice, but without predetermined conclusions or simplistic answers. We want to bring our whole selves through the church doors without leaving our hearts and minds behind, without wearing a mask. I don't know about you, but that sounds like the Episcopal Church to me. Contrary to popular belief," she writes, "we won't be won back with hipper worship bands, fancy coffee shops, and pastors who wear skinny jeans, which is good news for me. I can't pull off skinny jeans. We millennials have been advertised to our entire lives, so we can smell BS from a mile away. The church is the last place we want to be sold another product, the last place we want to be entertained. Millennials aren't looking for a hipper Christianity. We're looking for a truer Christianity, a more authentic Christianity. Like every generation before ours and every generation after, we're looking for Jesus. The same Jesus who can be found in the strange places he's always been found, in bread, in wine, in baptism, in the word, in suffering, in community, and among the least of these. No coffee shops or fog machines required. Aren't we all looking for Jesus? And sometimes the church does amazingly unhelpful things in trying to reach out to those seeking Jesus. I'd like to share a short video clip with you that helps to illustrate this point in a humorous yet serious way. Let me say that I see some of my own church community's weak points in this video, and I invite you to see if anything resonates with yours. At this point, you may be wondering, who invited this Grinch to speak? Well, here's where we switch prophetic voices to focus on the future, an inspirational, aspirational, and hopeful future of what might be. Prepare to open yourselves for the stirring of the Spirit. There's an important role for all of us in the church, but perhaps ECW is even more uniquely situated to reach out and mentor young adults, and in the process, learn from them and experience mutual transformation. It's always important for us to remember that when we call upon the Spirit to direct us, we may be surprised with what that stirring evokes. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of sound mind. Kathleen Norris says this about prayer. Prayer is not asking for what you think you want, but asking to be changed in ways you can't even imagine. People who are in the habit of praying know that when a prayer is answered, it's never in a way you expect. I can assure you, I certainly didn't imagine that the more in my prayer to God was going to turn out to be an Episcopal priest. Part of my own interest in reaching out to young adults is what I learned during my doctoral studies. In his book, After the Baby Boomers, How 20 and 30-somethings Are Shaping the Future of American Religion, Robert Wuthnow makes the declarative statement, "The future of American religion is in the hands of adults now in their 20s and 30s. That got my attention. Wuthnow makes a compelling case for an understanding and proactive engagement of this generation if we care about the future of the church. Through careful analysis and surveys and in-depth interviews, he reveals a generation of young adults who are taking longer than the baby boomer generation did to establish themselves in careers, get married, start families, and settle down. I won't ask for a show of hands of how many of you have had your adult children or grandchildren come live with you after college, but I bet it would be a bunch. I see some hands already. What Wuthnow's research and suppositions did for me was to clearly articulate a wonderful opportunity for those of us who care about the church and the world we inhabit. One of the things that became readily apparent to me when I first came to the Cathedral was that we were blessed with a vibrant and growing young adult ministry. It seemed as if we were bucking the national religious trends, and I set about to find out why and what we might do to support and nurture this important ministry. My curiosity led to my concentrated focus on young adult ministry in my doctoral studies. The need and opportunity for mentoring young adults was one of my great learnings. And I see that as a wonderful opportunity for the ECW, much like Lois and Eunice took Timothy under wing. In her book, Big Questions, Worthy Dreams, Mentoring Young Adults in Their Search for Meaning, Purpose, and Faith, Sharon Dulles Parks speaks to this. She writes, "There's something particularly poignant and powerful about the 20-something years, harboring as they do both promise and vulnerability. Young adults embody critical strengths and yet remain dependent in distinctive ways upon recognition, support, challenge, and inspiration. Not only in the quality of individual young lives, but also our future as a culture depends in no small measure upon our capacity to recognize the emerging competence of young adults, to initiate them into the big questions, and to give them access to worthy dreams. That's a role all of us can play.
Who we are and what we have to offer as Episcopalian Christians in our time is of such profound value to those who might be fellow companions with us, that I'm willing to give up anything that is secondary to the primary call of the gospel and to the core truths of our tradition if it would help young people in this time and in this complex cultures that we live in, find their way to a relationship with God in Christ.
That's the Bishop of the Diocese of Washington, Marianne Edgar Buddy. And one of the things that I did with my doctoral research was to bring together all the young adult leaders in the diocese with the bishop so that we could compare notes on what was working in our various contexts. What will work in one church won't necessarily work in another. You have to know your own location and what speaks and what works for you. And so that was Bishop Marianne speaking a little bit about why she has such passion around this issue. Carol Howard Merritt, who is a Presbyterian minister in her 30s, speaks about this in her book, Tribal Church, Ministering to the Missing Generation. We often disregard the important assets that adults under 40 can offer us. In the denominational church, leadership positions are given to people who prove themselves in some way. Usually they're people who have a great deal of influence, time, or money. This makes sense. The problem is that young people usually do not have power, time, and money. But they have other things: potential, creativity, imagination, vision, and ideas. As the modern philosopher Hannah Arendt explains in The Life of the Mind, if we look at a person's lifespan in a linear fashion, we can see that a person at the beginning of the line looks forward, while a person at the end of the line looks backward. Younger people have a natural orientation toward planning, while older people have an inclination to reminisce. One example of the young adults at the Cathedral exemplifying that potential, creativity, imagination, and vision of which Merritt speaks was when our 20s and 30s group approached us with an idea of how to reach out to other young adults in the Washington area with an innovation on a worship service that we were already doing. They happened to choose our 4 p.m. Sunday afternoon evensong service. And their idea was that they would really help host that service. They would invite their friends, they would be the greeters, they would be the readers, and after the evensong service, they would invite people right across the street to a social time to get together. They called it Evensong and Even Social. And we've got a short video clip of one of our young adults explaining at that diocesan gathering why they chose it.
So when our 20s and 30s group decided that they wanted to have a service that would capture the imagination of all our young people, and particularly we wanted to have one that continued in our tradition, it was easy for us to decide on Evensong, this very ancient service which found its roots in the medieval English church. And equally important, we want to have a service that was inviting to those of our community who were from different backgrounds, who did not necessarily share our beliefs or our thoughts or who weren't necessarily Christians for crying out loud, but who wanted to find a place where they could be in conversation with other young people, where they could search and seek and hopefully find.
We're all looking for Jesus. Their experiment proved very successful and resulted in their young adult listserv growing by almost a third within the first 10 months of offering Even Song, Even Social. So how can all of us work with young adults in a supportive and transformative way? As Bishop Catherine said in her opening remarks yesterday, we need a next generation operations manual. In her book, Carol Howard Merritt offers 6 very practical ways in which the church can approach mentoring young adults. There's some basics here, if you will, that inform our work, and I'm just going to go over them very briefly. First is fostering intergenerational relationships. The church is the one place where we can still have multi-generational interaction, and it's crucial for the fabric of our society to preserve, maintain, and enhance this connection. There are so many ways of things that you go about doing in your life, in your work in the church, where we can partner with young adults and work with them in enhancing and transforming the work that we do. Second, promoting shared leadership. It's important that we have visible signs that every age group is involved in our churches, but we have to do more than allow the surface to look young. We must entrust people under 40 with some power and let them claim their authority. In a video clip you're about to see, one of our current leaders of our 20s and 30s group, who's a whopping 25 years old, tells a little bit about how he came to the Cathedral and got involved in ministry. And this young man was appointed by me to co-chair our Outreach and Social Justice Committee with a couple who are retired university professors. And so listen to Ethan tell a little bit about his story.
I started out as a very passive member of the 20s and 30s group, and very quickly I noticed there were ways to get involved, so I quickly became the newsletter editor after about 6 months, and then I joined the Cathedral Voices Choir, which is the volunteer choir. I got to know some of the ministers in the literacy group. I did the Advent Giving Tree. I helped the 20s and 30s with the Thanksgiving basket arrangement. And then after showing that I had a yearning to become involved as much as possible, I was made co-chair of the new Outreach and Social Justice group.
He really does have a full-time job, but spends a lot of time at the church too. Cultivating unambiguous inclusion. Who's my neighbor? Jesus said, love God with all your heart, mind, and spirit, and love your neighbor as yourself. Young adults see great value in diversity, including different sexual orientations, ethnicities, and religious backgrounds. If we want to minister to people in their 20s and 30s, we should back off bickering that excludes so many younger members, and we can begin welcoming and affirming the differences in our society. Once again, I'm going to turn to Ethan to talk a little bit about his experience of inclusion.
And I've had the great opportunity to take many of my friends who are either of no faith tradition or a different faith tradition to the Cathedral. So it's not necessarily telling them how important the Cathedral is to me. It's showing how important the Cathedral is to me and letting them be part of that experience. Whether I brought people to my confirmation service that normally wouldn't come to the Cathedral, some avowed atheists that still do seek some sort of spirituality. And then I have other people who are somewhat nervous about organized religion. But when I, give them extend to them a very soft invitation of, this is a place where no one's trying to push their views on you. It's merely an invitation to experience the mystery of faith together, whatever that means to you. they're more susceptible to that idea.
4, encouraging economic understanding. As congregations reach out to include younger adults in their spiritual communities, they do well to understand that younger generations find themselves struggling in a challenging economic climate, not of their own making. To climb into the middle class, people in their 20s and 30s live under a mountain of interest payments, and most people in younger generations do not make any decisions without first consulting their debt load. The economic predicament of younger generations it affects their career choices, their living arrangements, family structures, quality of life, church commitments, and ability to have children. Once again, I'm turning to Ethan to tell you a little bit about his ideas around stewardship.
I try to give to Washington National Cathedral what I can in any combination of my time, talent, and treasure. I am not ashamed of saying that normally it is more my time and my talent than my treasure, but I do try to give back financially when I can. That's because it has enriched my life so much. Coming to such a transient city, I needed some place to really call home. It's not the various apartments I've lived in, it's not the various places I've worked, it's the cathedral. And that's because it has offered me family and has offered me a safe place to grow in my faith and to allow me to give back to my community.
He's not up for adoption. You may wonder how we have so many clips. The Cathedral has been putting various things together to help tell our story, and Ethan was someone that I recommended our communications department have a conversation with, and you can see why. 5, discovering affirming traditions. Our most important tradition is Sunday morning worship. This is the main entry point that we have with new people, and we need to remember that many people are experiencing and learning the church's traditions from scratch. So when we say that we will meet someone after the service in the narthex, they're going to look at us like we are speaking some foreign language that they have never heard. And we just need to be really mindful of that. And we must realize that affirming traditions will connect our congregations to God, each other, and the world. In a time of increased alienation, young adults come to church to practice spiritual traditions, meet friends, and participate in social justice. Our churches are the perfect places and communities in which to provide the space for these things to happen. We can present opportunities for people to enrich their spiritual lives. We can make a space for young adults to meet and care for one another in social settings outside of committee meetings and the other avenues that they walk in their lives. Finally, 6, nurturing spiritual community. As churches become more and more hospitable to younger generations, we'll need to stop relying on administrative committees to make our spiritual and social connections. Instead, let us encourage incarnational communities. As Christians, we're the people of the living word. We believe that the law, poetry, and prophecies form our communities, and those words were embodied in the flesh and blood of Jesus Christ. And since Jesus' time, we've built the body of Christ out of our own imperfect parts. We've become his feet, hands, mouths, arms, and legs as we care for one another in the world. As we make up the body, there's something important in our own physical selves as we learn to be present with one another, seeing the steady gaze of a person's eyes, hearing the sound of a resonant voice, feeling the warmth of another's hand, smelling the aroma that fills the air, and then tasting the food that we prepare and consume together. I hope that with these clips and some of the things that I've shared with you, that you've been encouraged by what you've seen and heard regarding the possibilities of mentoring and working even more intentionally with young adults in your communities. You have so much to offer. Remember that God's not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of sound mind. You have within each one of you all you need to make a lasting and transformative difference in the next generation. Share what you know and what you've learned in life, the most important things that offer us the opportunity to live a meaningful and purposeful life. I'd like to offer one final reflection on why I'm so confident about all that you bring and have to share with the next generation. Perhaps some of you have begun reading David Brooks' new book, The Road to Character. He writes about the most important things in life, and I quote, "Recently, I've been thinking about the difference between the resume virtues and the eulogy virtues. The resume virtues are the ones you list on your resume, the skills that you bring to the job market and that contribute to external success. The eulogy virtues are deeper. They're the virtues that get talked about at your funeral, the ones that exist at the core of your being, whether you are kind, brave, honest, or faithful, what kind of relationships you formed. Most of us would say that the eulogy virtues are more important than the resume virtues, but Brooks confesses that for long stretches of his life, he spent more time thinking about the latter than the former. He says our education system is certainly oriented around the resume virtues more than the eulogy ones. Public conversation is too. The self-help tips in magazines, the nonfiction bestsellers. Most of us have clear strategies for how to achieve career success than for how we develop a profound character. Brooks builds on the work of Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik, who, in noting that there are two accounts of creation in Genesis, argues that there are two opposing sides of our nature, which he called Adam 1 and Adam 2. Brooks modernizes the rabbi's work and describes Adam 1 as the career-oriented, ambitious side of our nature. Adam 1 is the external resume Adam. Adam 1 wants to build, create, produce, and discover things. He wants to have high status and win victories. Adam 2 is the internal Adam. Adam 2 wants to embody certain moral qualities. Adam 2 wants to have a serene inner character, a quiet but solid sense of right and wrong. Not only to do good, but to be good. Adam 2 wants to love intimately, to sacrifice self in the service of others, to live in obedience to some transcendent truth, to have a cohesive inner soul that honors creation and one's own possibilities. While Adam 1 wants to conquer the world, Adam 2 wants to obey a calling to serve the world. While Adam 1 asks how things work, Adam 2 asks why things exist and what ultimately we are here for. Adam 1's motto is success. Adam 2 experiences life as a moral drama. His motto is charity, love, and redemption. Brooks asserts, we live in a society that encourages us to think about how to have a great career, but leaves many of us inarticulate about how to cultivate the inner life. The competition to succeed and win admiration is so fierce that it becomes all-consuming. The consumer marketplace encourages us to live by a utilitarian calculus, to satisfy our desires and lose sight of the moral stakes involved in everyday decisions. The noise of fast and shallow communications makes it harder to hear the quieter sounds that emanate from the depths. We live in a culture that teaches us to promote and advertise ourselves and to master the skills required for success, but that gives little encouragement to humility, sympathy, and honest self-confrontation, which are necessary for building character. Brooks decided to write a book about Adam too, how some people have cultivated strong character. In self-disclosure, Brooks says he wrote the book to save his soul. He closes his reflections as follows: "Joy is not produced because others praise you. Joy emanates unbidden and unforced. Joy comes as a gift when you least expect it, at those fleeting moments when you know why you were put here and what truth you serve. You may not feel giddy at those moments. You may not hear the orchestra's delirious swell or see flashes of crimson and gold, but you'll feel a satisfaction, a silence, a peace, a hush. Those moments are the blessings and the signs of a beautiful life." This is holy and important work with which we are all engaged. Working together, I know there's so much we can accomplish. I want you to know that the National Cathedral stands ready to journey with you. We want to be a resource for you and for the church. In the short video clip that follows, I hope you'll see the invitation from us to engage with you and to learn from you. Whether it's offering pilgrimages to your ECW group or forums on the topics of our day that you can watch online or access through our archives, we're your National Cathedral, and we seek to serve. I invite you during the course of your convention to visit our booth in the exhibition hall and explore with us how we can serve you. And now for the clip.
When I first saw the cathedral, I was actually quite young. When I saw it, I was quite confused about what it was. I thought it was a castle, and I asked my mom, why is there a castle in the middle of the city? And she said, it's a cathedral. And then when I walked in, I was blown away. It is massive inside. And I really, really enjoyed just being inside the cathedral.
Washington National Cathedral was founded in 1907. And it had two main missional foci. One of them was to be a great church for national purposes, and the other was to be a cathedral for the city of Washington.
The foundation stone of the cathedral is actually two stones, a large slab of American granite. Embedded within it is a rock that was quarried in Bethlehem. Inscribed upon it are the words from John's Gospel, "He took on flesh and dwelt among us." Everything stands on that in this place, literally, figuratively, spiritually.
It was created with the intention to really welcome people from the nation and be a visible, almost an icon itself of the work of God in the city and in the world.
Over the course of our history, we've had great speakers and preachers here, from Billy Graham to Martin Luther King to presidents to former presidents. We have had educational and cultural events here. We are a kind of focal point for religious life in America.
It hits people in different ways. Some people see it as a purely religious building and a spiritual experience. No matter whether you're religious or not, you walk in there and I feel inspired.
I don't think it matters how many times I've stepped through the door of the cathedral. I'm in awe each and every time with the grandeur, the beauty, the light shining through the windows, the sound of the music that rises when a service begins.
to walk into a place like this, you'd almost expect to have that piece that transports you one stage further in your experience of stone and light and music.
It's a wonderful piece of architecture that has a whole encyclopedia of wonderful building craft in its carved stone, its needlepoints, its stained glass, its ironwork, and all the other craftsmanship that went into the building.
We're more than just a pretty face. We are a beautiful building with a really important mission, not only spiritually, but programmatically and civically as well.
It's a place of welcome, worship, and ministry that serves all people.
It's a place where our faith shapes our service to every person and to every nation.
It's a place to be inspired.
Women of the Church, you have within you the power and transformative love of Christ to teach and show others how to live lives of meaning. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. Share how Christ has touched and transformed you. Lead others to the gift of an inner life where one can hear the still small voice of God. In short, don't just stir up the Spirit, share it. Celebremos. Thank you and God bless you.